Hey guys, welcome back. I am the Scared Sheep, and in this video, we will be finishing the Japanese mockumentary series Housou Kinshi with episode 6. While there is technically a 7th episode in the series, I'm just covering up to episode 6, as these were the original episodes of the series. If you've missed any of the other episodes so far, be sure to go check them out, as each episode has its own different truth to find. I may come back to this series at a later date to cover the movies, but for now, we're just going to wrap up Housou Kinshi with this final episode. Episode 6 is called Death Limit. In this episode, we are introduced to the Sono husband and wife, Totsuo and Matsu, who are having problems in their marriage due to the husband's bursts of rage and violence. Fitting for the final episode, this story takes a few good twists and turns. And while I still find this episode's conclusion fine on its own, it's only fair to mention that it actually isn't the complete story, as more is revealed in the first movie. But for now, we'll just go with what this episode gives us. While many of the clues are visual and you should be able to solve most of it based on them alone, there are a few clues that, similar to episode 5, rely on a knowledge of the Japanese language. So I will do my best to explain them at the end. I do want to give a trigger warning, however, for domestic violence. This is the main subject of this episode, so for anyone who might find this topic too upsetting, please consider skipping this one and checking out a different episode instead. Now let's jump into the episode and see if you can spot the truth. The episode begins with a letter addressed to the journalist of this story, Kumura Shunsaku. The letter is from a woman claiming to be in fear of her life due to her husband's abuse and asks for Kumura's help to save her. Having seen a documentary that Kumura had done covering a severe case of high school bullying, the wife hopes that he may be able to help her. With the letter in hand, Kumura heads to meet with 29-year-old Sono Matsu in her apartment while her husband Totsuo is at work. Matsu tells of how her husband will hit her and throw things at her, becoming enraged over the smallest thing. Once, he even threw a boiling kettle at her. She says that he wasn't always like this, and the abuse started only about 2 years ago. She assumes that it's due to stress from work, but he's never mentioned anything specific to her. While Matsu would like to divorce her husband, she's afraid that he will kill her. Knowing that he is likely to do so eventually if she stays, though, she has reached out for help. A few days later, Kumura returns to set up hidden cameras to catch the abuse on film. Later on that night, we see him camped out in a van outside the apartment monitoring the situation, and Matsu waiting at the dinner table for her husband to come home. At 8:15, we hear the doorbell ring, and she answers it to let her husband in. Sweetly, Matsu talks about how she accidentally made too much food, but notices that her husband seems off. Speaking very respectfully, Matsu carefully asks Totsuo if something happened today. He says that for now, he's just hungry. Relieved that that's all it is, Matsu goes to pour miso soup into their bowls while he gets changed. The meal starts off fine with lots of small talk about the food, but suddenly takes a turn for the worse when Totsuo asks if there's any ryu, a spicy chili oil often eaten with gyoza and other Chinese dishes. Matsu apologizes, saying that she forgot to get some, and her husband loses it. He throws her to the ground, throwing gyoza at her and shouting, while all Matsu can do is apologize over and over again. Off-screen, we can hear him assaulting her even more while we see Kumura monitoring the recording. The following day, Kumura meets with Matsu in her apartment again, and says that he'd like to catch even more raw footage, as he believes that this will not only help to expose her husband, but potentially save other wives out there who are experiencing the same thing. Scared of having to keep going like this, Matsu is reluctant, but Kumura promises to protect her. We are now shown scenes from Kumura's previous film 8 years ago, where he documented a high school bullying incident. The documentary interviews the victim, Kamino Ruma, and the leader of the group of bullies, Eguchi Kurumi, but ends tragically when the victim sets herself on fire, killing both her and the bully leader. Returning to the apartment, we see Matsu and Totsuo sitting down to dinner, while Kumura is in the van to monitor the surveillance camera once again. On the third day of monitoring, the husband asks for Tabasco sauce, but there isn't any. This time, we get a completely different response to the Ryu incident, as he just brushes it off and continues with his meal. It's now been 10 days, and there has yet to be another incident. Frustrated that he still hasn't caught any more footage that he can use, Kumura calls the home phone and asks Matsu to purposely make her husband angry to try and cause a fight. Matsu returns to the table and asks Totsuo not to hit her anymore because it hurts. This sends him into a rage, where he grabs Matsu by the hair and smashes a glass bottle behind her before returning to the table to finish his meal. Nodding as he watches, Kumura seems to be pleased with this turn of events. It's been 20 days since they started filming. Totsuo was injured in a hit-and-run accident, so while he is in hospital, Matsu asks Kumura to come over. She confesses that about a month ago, so just before they began filming, she contacted a revenge website called Shiedo about her husband. Immediately regretting what she had done, she tried to undo it, but received a confirmation email that her wish will come true within a month. The day after Totsuo returns home from the hospital, he begins to act differently. That night at dinner, he even apologizes to Matsu for the abuse. He says that getting injured himself made him realize how wrong he was to hurt her, and that she is the most important thing to him. We now see a much more cheerful-looking Matsu report that her husband seems to have returned to his old self, and acts like a kind older brother now. We see the husband returning to work, and everything seems to be working out well for the couple. But the next day, the film crew enters the apartment to a panicking Matsu. It appears she received an email from Shiedo, the revenge website, saying that the death limit has been activated and her wish will be granted in 3 days. Kumura tries to help her calm down by promising to watch over her husband for those 3 days. We see the first 2 days go by without incident. On the third day, we hear what sounds like a gunshot being fired in front of Totsuo's office. But it was really only a car tire popping. That night, Totsuo comes home from work just before midnight due to having to work overtime.
ただ、これがうまくいかなかったら遅い。大丈夫だよ。だって今日あんだけ遅くまで準備したんだからさ。何がいい？何がいいかな。何が始まるんだ。
何やってんだよ。孫さん、孫さん、大丈夫ですか？孫さん。孫さん。もしもし。
残念でした、菰田さん。
え？
あなたはテストに全て不合格でした。
どういうことだ？
つまり粛清されるのはあなたということです。
Kumura is never heard from again after that night.
引っ越したということで
Returning to the apartment now, we see that it is empty and the Sono couple have since moved. Almost as if in a hurry, as they left behind their little corkboard sign with their names on it.
テレビ業界の人ってよく言葉を逆逆さまとかに言ってコーヒーをひーこうとか寿司をしすとか。
At the very end, we get a little extended footage of Kumura's last moments, as well as some additional clues to help us solve the truth.
わかりませんか？よーく思い出してください。
Okay, so by now you all know that this is not really the story of a woman seeking the help of a journalist to escape her abusive husband. So what is the real story?
住む主婦から
The truth is that the whole situation with the wife seeking help to escape her abusive husband was a lie. Matsu and Totsuo were hired by Kamino Ruma, who runs the organization Shiero, to play out the scenario as a series of tests for Kumura. The tests would determine whether Kumura truly cares about the subjects in his documentary or not. If you recall, Kamino was the victim in the bullying case that he documented, which ended with her setting herself on fire when the bullying got to be too much for her. The newspaper and media reported that both her and the leader of the group of girls bullying her, Eguchi Kurumi, both died. However, it seems that Kamino in fact survived and had just disappeared for a number of years. Our first clue that something was off in this story was when Totsuo comes home from work the night they ate gyoza. Do you normally ring the doorbell when you come home to your own house? It would be very odd behavior for someone who wasn't just playing a part. We can also see on many of the evenings right before the violence begins, Totsuo checks his phone before getting angry. This would be a very unnatural thing to do if you were really having a discussion with your wife that was making you angry. In reality, he's probably receiving instructions from Kamino on what to do or say. Our next big clue comes when Totsuo is injured in the hit-and-run accident. We see his bandaged right leg while he is at home, but the injury switches to the left leg when he goes back to work. The injury itself is completely made up, and he was never in any accident. Throughout the video, we also see that a masked individual has been watching Kumura on a number of occasions. This is the same mask that we see on the Shiedo website, and the same woman that we see at the very end of the episode, Kami no Ruma. Were you able to spot it? The biggest clue of all is at the very end. When we slow down the video, we can see the masked woman holding an axe, while Totsuo and Matsu stand behind her with a video camera. It's initially a very quick scene, but by slowing it down, it becomes much clearer. Okay, now let's go through the Japanese clues. The biggest one being the Shiedo website. Shiedo in Japanese is written in katakana like this. Now let's squish it together a bit and it looks like this, which is read as Eguchi, the last name of the leader of the bullies. To help make the connection, we are shown her name a few times on both her notebook and in the newspaper. Now this clue alone might point towards Eguchi herself being behind it all, but we see at the very bottom of the website the name of the manager being listed as Nanakawa Noramu. By writing it vertically and then reversing it as if reflected in a mirror, Nanakawa Noramu becomes Kami no Ruma. While we're on the subject of Japanese name anagrams, we are given a small clue about our husband and wife team in their names as well. Looking at their full names, Sono Matsu and Sono Totsuo, if we were to reverse them and write it backwards to forwards, we would get Suma no Uso and Oto no Uso, meaning wife's lie and husband's lie. Now let's go through the list of tests that we were shown at the end. There were 3 tests listed. Number 1, help the wife. This test is referring to when he was monitoring the video cameras during their fights. On not just one, but 2 occasions, Kumura just sat back and watched Totsuo beat Matsu even after he had promised to protect her. So he failed that test. Test number 2, no script. This test isn't as obvious as the other 2, but my guess is that this refers to the stretch of days where there was no scripted conflict between Matsu and Totsuo. Rather than be happy that things were going smoothly for Matsu, Kumura called her and forced her to create a situation that would make Totsuo lash out and put her in danger. That's now 2 out of 3 tests failed. Test number 3, help the husband? The third and final test comes at the end when Matsu is begging him through the camera to save her husband. Once again, even though he promised to watch over him, Kumura just sat there and watched from his van rather than jumping in to help. Having failed all 3 tests and shown that he in fact does not care about the well-being of the subjects of this documentary, just as he did not really care about the girls in the bullying incident, Kami no Ruma gets her revenge, and Kumura is never seen again. So there you have it, folks. We are now finished with the Housou Kinshi TV series. Let me know what you thought of the episode or the series as a whole in the comments below. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to my channel so that you never miss new content. Thanks again to everyone for all of your support, and I'll see you next time with more Japanese Horror Explained. Bye!